Snow drifted down in thick, silent flakes, smothering the ruined landscape in white. The wind howled over the ridge like a mourning beast, yet Elias Thorne barely noticed. His breath clouded the air before him, rhythmic and steady, as he moved with the purposeful steps of a man long used to survival. The war was behind him. 5 years now since he resigned from the military and exiled himself to Viridian 7, the frostbitten edge of colonized space. Here, silence was constant. Here, memory spoke louder than any voice. Elias was tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered with lines etched by loss more than age. The coat he wore had seen better years, and his boots were patched with old texkin that barely kept the wet out anymore. He carried a thermal pickaxe slung over one shoulder and a worn satchel over the other. The mountain slope ahead of him was familiar, yet something caught his eye this morning, an unnatural bulge beneath the snow. His instincts prickled. He dropped to one knee, brushed the snow away carefully, and the dull gleam of metal stared back, curved, scorched, and bearing the faded crest of the interstellar biogenesis core. His mouth tightened. The biogenesis core hadn't operated in this sector for over a century. The pod embedded in the snowbank must have been here for decades, possibly longer. He reached out, touched the side of the structure. Warm. That made no sense. A sound echoed from within, soft, urgent, not mechanical, not human, alive. Elias stepped back, his hand already moving to the stun blade at his hip. He waited. Another sound, like claws against metal, scrabbling. Then a second, a third, not hostile, frightened. With a sharp hiss, the pod emergency hatch split and groaned open. Warm air, thick with the scent of ozone and something musky, spilled into the cold. And then from the darkness within came a pair of eyes, bright amber, unblinking, followed by another, and another. They emerged in clusters, cautious but unafraid. Small creatures, no taller than his knee, with bronze scales and eyes too old for their bodies. Wingtips flicked open and shut as they padded into the snow, steam curling from their tiny nostrils. Elias counted them, 13, all identical in size and shape. Reptilian, intelligent, alien, familiar. He took a slow breath, dropping into a crouch. "You're not from around here," he said, voice low. The largest of them, if the slight difference in horn length meant anything, stepped forward. It cocked its head, the way a hawk might. Then, slowly, it took another step, and collapsed into the snow with a faint whimper. Starving. Elias didn't hesitate. He reached into his satchel and retrieved the last of his protein strips, dehydrated meat, hard as alloy. He snapped it in half, tossed a piece into the snow. The dragon, because what else could he call it, sniffed, hesitated, then lunged forward. The others followed, converging like wind-blown fire. By the time the food was gone, they were gathered close, forming a rough semicircle around him. One clambered onto his knee, sniffed at his gloved hand. Another nestled against his boot. Elias stayed still, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had no explanation for their presence. No signal had been received. No ship on scanners. Nothing in official records had ever confirmed the existence of living dragons, let alone hatchlings. And yet they were real, alive, and bonded to him already. He rose slowly, careful not to disturb them. The hatchlings followed. Wherever he moved, they padded after him through the snow, a train of winged shadows. Back at his shelter, a cobbled-together dome of salvage parts. He cleared space by the heat coil and let them settle in. They curled around each other like house cats, some on their backs, others sprawled flat across the floor. He watched them, kneeling near the edge of the coil, unsure what he was supposed to feel. One of them, the boldest, crept forward and tapped its snout against his chest. It exhaled, and a small plume of smoke curled into his beard. "Great," he muttered. "Now I've got 13 flamethrowers living in my living room." The creature chirped, amused or mocking, perhaps. They seemed to understand tone. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the hatchlings. Occasionally, they twitched in dreams. Once, he heard one utter a low, musical tone that made something ancient stir inside his chest. The next morning, The storm outside had worsened. Visibility was down to a few feet. He took advantage of the delay to run a scan on the pod. Results came back garbled, likely due to time decay, but one tag came through. Project Emberborn. His breath caught. That name had passed through whispers during the war. An abandoned black project involving species hybridization and psychic resonance. Weaponization of mythical genomes. The sort of thing entire battalions were buried to cover up. Elias had dismissed it at the time as wartime paranoia. He looked toward the dragons, now played with scraps of wire and fabric like overgrown puppies. If this was Emberborn's legacy, someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. He stepped outside to clear his thoughts. Snow battered his coat, but he barely felt it. The wind carried a high note, thin, almost melodic. He turned, and in the distance, over the horizon line, the storm cloud shimmered faintly, like light reflecting through glass. When he returned, the hatchlings were gathered in a circle, all 13, eyes glowing faintly, heads bowed toward a central point. Beneath them, the floor sparked, not from fire, but from energy. Pale blue light spiraled outwards in lines that resembled circuitry, or runes. He backed away, his mouth dry. "What the hell are you?" The largest looked up and met his eyes. There was no fear, no confusion, only patience. That night, he dreamed of fire, of wings that blotted out suns, of stars crumbling like ash, and above it all, a voice, not human, not dragon, but something that spoke in both and neither. He who shelters the seed shall awaken the flame. Elias woke gasping, heart racing. The largest hatchling sat by his chest, its eyes still glowing faintly. It exhaled again, and this time the smoke shaped itself into a ring before fading. Elias sat up, hand resting on the creature's narrow head. "What did I start?" he whispered. Outside, the storm began to clear. In the morning sky, a shimmer of light expanded across the horizon. Faint, distant, but growing. Something was coming, something vast. And Elias Thorne, retired soldier and reluctant hermit, had just fed the spark that would bring it here. Elias stood at the edge of the ridge, the wind tearing at his coat, but his eyes were fixed on the faint shimmer dancing across the sky. It hadn't faded since dawn. In fact, it was growing, sharpening into definition, a pattern of swirling auroras that pulse in time with something he couldn't name, a rhythm older than language. Behind him, the hatchlings emerged from the shelter one by one, no longer shivering, no longer uncertain. They moved with intent, their movements synchronized like a flock guided by some shared thought. The bold one, whom he begun calling Bristle for its ridgeback, took the lead. It flapped its wings once, hard, and hovered for a brief second before landing beside Elias with a triumphant chirp. "Didn't think those would work in this gravity," he muttered, watching the others mimic Bristle's attempt. They had grown, not by inches, but by essence. Their scales had deepened in hue, their eyes now almost luminescent. Something in them was changing rapidly, and whatever was happening to the sky above seemed linked. Elias returned to the shelter and opened his old military logs, searching keywords through corrupted archives. Emberborn, sea line, dragon-based genomes, psychic clusters. What little survived in local storage confirmed the worst. The project was never meant to be public. It was designed to weaponize an ancient species believed extinct. But if these hatchlings were any indication, extinction had been a lie, or a delay. He paused the search, staring at the flickering display. It was foolish, but the longer he was around the creatures, the less he felt like a custodian and more like a participant. They responded to him, not just as a food source, but as something more. They watched him constantly, mirrored him. One had even tried to mimic his speech, laying out a garbled approximation of hello. When he tested them with logic puzzles, moving stones beneath cups, they understood in minutes. One solved the sequence backward just to prove it could. Elias stared at the makeshift nursery he'd created. They were gathered in a ring again, humming in low tones. The humming had a harmony to it now, layered, deliberate. It echoed faintly in his ears, even when he stepped away. That night, the dreams returned. Only this time, they weren't dreams. He floated in a void of light and sound, surrounded by wing forms vast as continents. Stars flickered like candles in their wake. One dragon hovered before him, eyes made of galaxies. Its voice pressed against his thoughts, not as words, but as understanding. The seedlings called. The blood answered. He woke with a start, gasping, hand trembling as he reached for the datapad. The glow of the aurora outside had intensified, now casting shadows through the shelter. The hatchlings were all awake, watching him in silence. One by one, they stepped forward and touched him with their foreheads. Each touch sent a pulse of warmth through his chest, brief but unmistakable. Then Bristle took the lead again, padding toward the entrance. It stopped, looked back at him, then stepped outside. The others followed. Elias hesitated, then grabbed his coat and moved after them. They had formed a spiral in the snow, wings slightly flared. Their bodies pulsed with internal light. Runes tracing beneath their scales, glowing with a slow, steady cadence. The snow around them melted in an even ring, steam lifting in soft tendrils. Above, the aurora twisted violently. And then, with no warning, a beam of light dropped from the sky like a spear of god fire, striking the spiral center. Elias was thrown backward by the force, hitting the ground hard. When the light faded, he staggered up, disoriented. The hatchlings were unharmed, but the air around them shimmered. In the sky above, the clouds parted not from wind, but from force. Through the rupture, Elias saw movement. Massive shapes, silhouettes framed in starlight. They weren't ships. They were dragons. Real ones. Dozens. No, hundreds. Winged leviathans pouring through the rift in the sky, like a broken dam. Their roars cracked the upper atmosphere, reverberating like thunder wrapped in flame. Elias dropped to one knee, overwhelmed. His mind buckled against the immensity of it. The hatchlings came to him again, surrounding him protectively. Bristle climbed his arm, rested a clawed foot on his shoulder, and stared upward. Then the rift closed. Silence returned, but the sky still burned. In the hours that followed, Elias did not speak. He sat beside the hatchlings in the shelter, staring into the fire. The datapad in his hand displayed static, overloaded by proximity to the energy burst. When he finally moved, it was to examine his chest. His skin beneath the shirt had changed. Faint lines, curved and symmetrical, had formed along his sternum, the same rune pattern glowing beneath the dragon scales. He tried to deny it, call it stress, radiation, hallucination, but in his bones, he knew better. The seedlings had changed him, or awakened something already within him. He wasn't just a caretaker now. He was part of whatever came next. 3 days. That was all it had taken. From solitude to bond, from mystery to revelation. The hatchlings had chosen him not out of desperation, but recognition. He looked out the window, and in the distance, something glinted at the edge of the mountains. A form landed, wings folding in graceful arcs. Another, then another. 17 more in total. No ships, no signals, just dragons. The fire cracked beside him, casting golden light across Bristle's scales. Elias exhaled. Well, he murmured, voice almost steady, I guess it's not just us anymore. Outside, a low, echoing roar answered. The mountains were no longer silent. In the 3 days since the sky cracked open and 17 million dragons descended from the stars, the once desolate terrain of Viridian 7 had transformed into something unrecognizable. No longer a cold grave of ice and memory. It pulsed with heat, light, and movement. Dragons of every imaginable shape now claimed the sky, their vast wings casting shadows that danced across the snow-covered valleys. Elias stood on a rocky ledge overlooking the basin. His shelter, once a solitary dome, was now the epicenter of a migration. Dragons clustered in concentric patterns across the valley floor, vast and orderly, as if directed by an invisible command. Yet there was no chaos, no fire, no war cries. They had come peacefully. For him, he still struggled to understand why. Bristle perched on a jagged boulder beside him, larger now, shoulder-high and muscled. Its wings shimmered with copper fire beneath the sun, and its eyes, those familiar amber mirrors, never left Elias's face. "I fed 13 of you," he murmured, moored himself in the dragon. "That's all. I didn't call for any of this." Bristle made a low, throaty sound, something between a growl and a purr. Then it leaned forward and pressed its forehead against his shoulder. The contact was deliberate, intimate. Elias didn't pull away. Below them, the ground trembled, not from seismic activity, but from presence. One of the elders was arriving. They called it that, not by name, but by sensation. When a massive form emerged in the clouds, even the younger dragons bowed. Its wings stretched wider than a freighter's hull, its scales rippling with color that seemed to shift with every breath. A crown of bone spiraled from its skull, and its eyes were like twin suns, ancient and watching. Elias dropped to one knee, unbidden. The elder landed without a sound, despite its impossible size. Steam hissed beneath its claws as it approached, each step silent in the snow. And then it lowered its head just slightly and stared directly into Elias's mind. He did not see visions. He experienced truths. Flashes. A time before human memory. An age where dragons soar across countless worlds, guardians of energy and thought. An empire not forged by war, but by balance. Then a cataclysm. A betrayal by their own kind, ones who had sought to imprison their essence in machines. Projects like Emberborn had been fragments of that ambition. Humanity trying to resurrect a power it barely understood. The seedlings, the 13, were not accidents. They were keys, catalysts, a summoning, bound by a specific signature of thought, genetics, and intent. Elias. He broke the connection with a gasp, stumbling backward. Bristle steadied him with a wing. The elder waited, unblinking. You knew I'd find them," Elias rasped, "that I'd feed them." The elder's answer was not words, but a sense of inevitability, like stars moving through gravity wells. "You brought all of this down," he said, this time to Bristle. "You and your kind. You made me part of it." The hatchling's eyes softened, and it leaned closer. Another flash of understanding pierced his mind. The dragons hadn't chosen him randomly. His bloodline bore traces of something ancient, something dormant in humans for millennia, a sliver of draconic resonance. Perhaps seeded long ago, that spark had been enough. When he fed the 13, he hadn't just nurtured them. He completed a signal, a beacon. A war was coming, not of dragons against humans, but something older, something that had followed the dragons through time and dimension. The betrayers, those who had stolen draconic essence to forge artificial gods. They would come again, and this time they would find dragons united under one banner. Elias was no longer merely a man. He was a symbol, the conduit between two species. He wanted to laugh or scream or run, but instead he turned and stared at the horizon. Above the peaks, strange shapes flickered in and out of visibility. Ships, perhaps, or worse. The dragons began to stir. Wings spread, claws scraped against ice. The hum returned, the harmonic sound of hatchlings it once made, but now amplified by thousands of voices. The valley vibrated with it. It wasn't just a chant. It was preparation. Elias walked to the center of the basin. The dragons parted for him. He could feel their warmth on either side, hear their breath, sense their emotion, fear, determination, pride. He understood it all, as if it were his own. The elder lowered its head again, this time extending a single talon. At its tip hovered a sphere of fire, liquid, radiant, and alive. Elias reached for it, and the moment his fingers touched the flame, it entered him. Not burned, merged. He did not cry out. He did not fall. He stood taller, and the valley roared in unison. The elder bowed deeply, fully. The others followed. Dragons, as far as the eye could see, lowered their heads to the human who had fed the lost, and in doing so, awakened the legacy of an entire race. Elias didn't feel honored. He felt ready. The snow stopped falling. The air shimmered. The sky was no longer empty. The horizon fractured. What began as a ripple in the clouds cracked wide open, revealing a tear in the very fabric of the sky. Through it bled a darkness too deep to be shadow, too deliberate to be storm. It moved like a beast coiled behind a curtain, waiting for the moment to strike. Elias stood alone at the mouth of the ridge, eyes fixed on the breach. Behind him, the dragons gathered, layered rows of scales and wings stretching for miles, a living wall of breath and fire. Bristle rested beside him, now nearly twice the size it had been just days ago, a silent sentinel with molten eyes. He could feel it now, the pressure between worlds. The flame the elder had embedded in him no longer slept. It pulsed with urgency, a second heartbeat radiating from his core. When he breathed, the air shimmered. When he thought, the dragons responded, flicking their heads toward him as if catching a signal inaudible to others. They had not spoken, not in words, but the message had been clear since the rift appeared. The betrayers had returned. The valley that had once been their sanctuary now braced for war. From the blackened tear in the sky, shapes emerged, cold and rigid, unblinking. Machines, not vessels in the human sense, but vessels of thought, of will, forged from the husks of stolen essence. They floated like obsidian thorns, covered in intricate latticework of red light, and from each one poured a rain of constructs, faceless, skeletal things with blade limbs and humming cores. They did not descend gently. They fell like missiles, embedding themselves into the earth and unfolding on impact, rising with perfect mechanical grace. Elias watched them land with disturbing silence. Then the elder's voice returned, not through his ears, but directly into his mind, deeper this time, sharper. You must lead. The fire chooses its wielder, not the other way. He wanted to protest. He was no soldier anymore. He hadn't commanded since the fall of Karth 9, when half his team died because a satellite relay failed. He had retired for a reason, but that was before dragons had bowed to him. Bristle nudged his shoulder. Its scales shimmered with anticipation. The others were restless. He didn't need to command with words. They were listening for something deeper. So he stepped forward. His boots crunched against the ice. His breath turned silver in the cold, and with one thought, he ignited the flame. It erupted from his chest, a column of golden light that didn't burn but elevated. Dragons roared in unison, not out of fear, but release. The valley surged forward, a wave of wings and flame, taken to the skies and charging toward the invaders. Elias ran, not away, but toward the enemy, toward the machines clawing their way out of the snow. The flame inside him guided his limbs, made him faster, stronger, sharper. When one of the constructs turned toward him, blade rising, he didn't flinch. He raised his hand, and from it, a spear of searing energy lanced forward, striking the core of the thing and disintegrating it mid-motion. The others came at him, swift and brutal. Bristle landed beside him in a flash of wind and smoke, tearing through their ranks with Fong and Talon. One of the dragons on the outer ring swooped in and unleashed a jet of green fire that atomized half a dozen constructs in a single breath. But they kept coming, thousands of them, an endless tide of precise death. Elias fell into rhythm. Each swing of his energy-laced blade, a weapon the flame itself had forged in his hand, cut through the invaders like paper. He thought of the seedlings, of the way they'd hummed in circles. That harmonic connection wasn't just ritual. It was structure, command. So he changed the pitch of his breath, altering his internal tone, projecting intention not through voice but resonance. Dragons adapted instantly. The aerial strikes became coordinated, sweeping the enemy from the sky like leaves in a storm. Fire interlaced with lightning. Talons synchronized to shred their metallic foes. Even the youngest among them moved with strategic brilliance, sharing thought through sound and motion. Still, the rift remained. From it descended something new. A singular figure, humanoid in shape, yet clearly not born of flesh. Its body was smooth obsidian, its joints glowing with inner heat. Eyes like twin red stars stared down at Elias, not with hatred, but calculation. This was not a drone. It was a commander. It landed softly, its presence warping the air around it. Elias took a step forward, meeting its gaze. The others froze, as if awaiting permission. You carry the spark, it said, voice a blend of many tones, human, draconic, synthetic. You were not meant to. It was seated for others. Elias didn't answer. The flame inside him did. With a sudden surge of light, he launched himself forward, striking with a blow that would have split stone. The commander blocked it with a single hand. Energy exploded outward, throwing both of them backward. Elias rolled to his feet, chest heaving, the flames stabilizing him. The commander circled him, arms raised, blades forming from its wrists. You are the fracture. You are the delay. No, Elias growled. I'm the answer. He rushed again, this time fainting low, only to drive his blade upward into Commander's core. Sparks exploded. The commander shrieked, not in pain, but in some strange frequency of alarm. Dragons roared in response, wings closing in, fire and wind swirling into a cyclone of destruction. Elias felt the flame push harder now, guiding him to Commander's weakness, showing him not just where to strike, but when. Time slowed. Every breath was a universe. He struck once more, and the commander collapsed. But the rift did not close. Instead, it began to widen. Elias dropped to one knee, exhausted, flame flickering. The elder appeared beside him, landing with the quiet weight of ancient power. Its eyes turned toward the rift, then back to Elias. You were the first, but not the last. He understood. This was not a single war. It was the beginning of many. But for now, the valley held. For now, the dragons lived. Elias stood again, bristle at his side, and the sky, though fractured, held fast.